Have you ever felt like life has more chapters left to write, even when the world seems to think your story is already complete? Let me tell you about Margaret. At 82, she'd settled into a quiet routine at Willowbrook Nursing Home. Mornings in the sunroom with a book, afternoons watching the birds from her window, evenings listening to the hum of the hallway. It was peaceful, sure, but lonely. So lonely, in fact, she'd started talking to the photos on her nightstand just to fill the silence. But here's the thing about life, friends. It has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. One morning, a new name appeared on the room assignment board: Edith. And let me tell you, Edith didn't just bring a suitcase when she moved into Margaret's room. She brought, well, everything. Laughter that echoed down the halls, stories that could rival any paperback novel, and a stubborn refusal to let Margaret fade into the background of her own life. Today, we're going to walk through Margaret and Edith's journey, how a simple change, a new face, and an unexpected friendship rewrote the story of what's possible in our later years. You'll see how connection can reignite purpose, how small moments can become grand adventures, and why it's never too late to find someone who makes your world feel brand new. So settle in, grab a cup of tea, and let's begin. Now, let's rewind to Margaret's life before Edith arrived. Picture this. It's a Tuesday morning at Willowbrook. The clock ticks louder than the TV in the common room. Margaret sits in her usual chair by the window, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She's lived here for 3 years since her son moved overseas, a decision made for her safety, but one that left her feeling untethered. Her days blend together, each one a carbon copy of the last. She's polite to the staff, waves to neighbors in the hall, but deep down, she's convinced this is just how it's meant to be now. Quiet, solitary, waiting. But then Edith arrives. Now, Edith's 78, with a cane in one hand and a sequined tote bag in the other. She's got a voice that carries, and a smirk that says she's still got a few tricks up her sleeve. When the nurse wheels her into Margaret's room, Edith takes one look at the twin bed by the window and declares, "Well, this'll do, as long as you don't mind a little chaos before breakfast." Margaret, of course, is bewildered. Chaos? Her quiet sanctuary? But here's what she doesn't know yet. Edith's chaos comes with homemade crossword puzzles tucked under pillows, with impromptu sing-alongs to old jazz records, with midnight conversations about first loves and forgotten dreams. At first, though, it's rocky. Margaret's used to her routines, her privacy. Edith leaves teacups everywhere, forgets to turn off the lamp, talks through Jeopardy. But then, one rainy afternoon, something shifts. Margaret's flipping through an old photo album when Edith peers over her shoulder. "Who's that dashing fellow?" she asks, pointing to a black-and-white wedding photo. And just like that, Margaret's telling stories she hasn't spoken aloud in decades. About her late husband, their dance hall dates, the time they got lost driving to Niagara Falls. Edith listens like it's the most fascinating tale she's ever heard. Friends, that's the magic, isn't it? Sometimes all it takes is one person really seeing us, not just our age or our limitations, but the lives we've lived and the people we still are. Over the next few weeks, Margaret and Edith become, partners in crime. They start a weekly poker game, though Edith always seems to have an extra ace. They sneak extra sugar into their oatmeal when the dietitian isn't looking. They even convince the activities director to let them host a Golden Oldies talent show, which, between you and me, ends with Edith tap dancing to Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy while Margaret plays kazoo. But here's what's truly remarkable. As Margaret laughs more, she aches less. The arthritis in her hands seems to bother her less during their morning card games. The walks to the garden feel shorter when they're debating the best way to grow roses. Even the nurses notice. She's brighter, more present, like someone turned up the volume on her soul. Now, you might be wondering, how did two women from such different worlds become each other's lifeline? Well, that's where the real lessons hide. Stay with me, because what happens next, the stumbles, the breakthroughs, the way they navigate disagreements and health scares, and the occasional burnt toast, holds truths we can all learn from. Truths about resilience, about letting people in, about discovering that the best adventures often begin with 3 little words. Got room for one more? You know, when Margaret first told me about those early days with Edith, she described it like learning to dance again after decades off the floor. You step on each other's toes at first, she said, but then you find the rhythm. And oh, did they ever find it. But let's not pretend it was all tap shoes and kazoos. Real friendship, the kind that changes you, isn't just sunshine, it's also the storms you weather together. Take that first big disagreement they had. Edith, ever the social butterfly, decided to invite half the nursing home to their room for a midnight feast, which, in Edith's world, meant pilfered Jell-O cups and saltine crackers. Margaret, who'd spent years guarding her quiet like a treasure, felt invaded. She snapped, "This is my space too, you know." Edith, hurt, retreated to the garden for hours. But here's where the magic happens, friends. Later that night, Margaret found Edith at the patio table staring at the moon. Instead of doubling down on her frustration, Margaret did something brave. She sat down and said, "I miss the quiet sometimes." Edith sighed and replied, "And I'm terrified of being alone." Just like that, 2 truths hung in the air. No apologies, no solutions, just honesty. That conversation became their blueprint. Margaret learned to say, "I need an hour to myself," without guilt. Edith started leaving little notes when she'd be out. "Gone to bingo, back by 3. So Margaret wouldn't worry. They didn't erase their differences. They danced with them. Now, let's talk about the real glue that held them together. The hard days. The ones we don't post about on social media. Like when Edith took a bad fall in the shower and wound up in rehab for 6 weeks. Margaret, who'd never left Willowbrook since arriving, insisted the staff drive her to the hospital every other day. She'd sit by Edith's bed, reading mystery novels aloud, even though Margaret hated mysteries. "Too many red herrings," she'd grumble. But Edith's laughter as they guessed the killer, worth every page. And when Margaret's arthritis flared so badly she couldn't hold a pen to write to her grandson, Edith became her hands. "Dictate to me," she'd say, perched on the edge of the bed with a notepad. But Edith being Edith, she'd add cheeky postscripts like, "P.S. Your grandma's a card shark. Send more chocolate bribes." Here's what Margaret taught me about those times. You don't realize how much you can bear until someone's bearing it with you. It's not about fixing everything. It's about showing up, bringing soup, holding a hand, letting silence do the talking when words fail. But let's not forget the joy either. The joy that comes from being seen, truly seen, by someone who's learned your quirks and loves you anyway. Like how Edith knew to save the crusts of the toast for Margaret, who secretly preferred them crispy. Or how Margaret could spot Edith's "I'm pretending to be fine" smile from across the room, and would immediately challenge her to a cutthroat game of checkers to shake her out of it. One of my favorite stories? The time they conspired to redecorate their room. Edith hated the beige walls. Margaret loathed the fluorescent lighting. So they pooled their Social Security checks, bought a lamp with a stained glass shade, and framed a bunch of old postcards from their travels. When the director said, "Residents aren't allowed to alter the walls," Edith fired back, "Honey, at our age, we've earned the right to break a few rules." They compromised by using removable adhesive strips, but oh, the rebellion in their eyes. Friends, this is where we often sell ourselves short. We think, I'm too set in my ways to adapt. Or, what if we don't have enough in common? But Margaret and Edith's secret wasn't compatibility. It was curiosity. They asked questions. They paid attention. They celebrated small victories, like the day Margaret finally admitted she liked Edith's off-key humming. And here's something you might not expect. Their friendship didn't just enrich them. It rippled out. That poker game they started? It's now a weekly event with 12 regulars. The Golden Oldies talent show? A yearly tradition that even staff members' families attend. Margaret's son, visiting from overseas, told me through tears, "I haven't heard Mom laugh like that since Dad passed." But perhaps the most beautiful part is how they gave each other permission to be fully themselves. Edith, the lifelong performer, finally had an audience who'd clap for her Shirley Temple impressions. Margaret, the quiet observer, found someone who valued her wisdom over her words. They became mirrors, reflecting back the best versions of each other, versions they'd forgotten existed. Now, you might be thinking, that's lovely, but what if I'm not in a nursing home? What if I'm alone in my house, or my community doesn't have an Edith? Ah, but here's the thing. Connection doesn't require a roommate. It starts with a choice. A choice to say yes when someone offers a smile at the grocery store. To call an old friend you've been meaning to reconnect with. To join that book club you've been eyeing, even if you're nervous. Margaret and Edith's story isn't about luck. It's about openness. About believing that the next chapter might hold a character who changes everything. And if you're sitting there thinking, but I'm not the outgoing type, remember? Margaret wasn't either. She simply showed up day after day and let life surprise her. Of course, no friendship is without its tests, especially when health, memory, or life's unpredictability comes knocking. But what Margaret and Edith discovered in those harder moments, well, that's where the deepest gold lies. There's a phrase Edith used to say whenever someone asked her secret to happiness: bloom where they stick you. And friends, if anyone knew how to do that, it was these two. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life kept testing them. A year into their friendship, Edith started forgetting things. Little things at first, where she'd left her glasses, the name of that actor from Casablanca, then bigger ones, like whether she'd eaten lunch, or which way to the dining hall. Margaret, ever the quiet observer, noticed before anyone else. She began leaving reminder notes in Edith's handwriting, knowing the sight of her own script would calm her. She'd say, "Edith, let's walk to breakfast," instead of pointing out they'd already missed it. And when the diagnosis came, mild cognitive decline, Margaret made a promise. "I'll be your memory until you're sick of me." But here's the twist. Edith, even as her mind fogged, became Margaret's reminder to live in the now. One afternoon, when Margaret fretted over a misplaced newsletter, Edith tugged her toward the garden. "The roses won't wait for your worry," she said. And there they sat, two women in their 80s, watching bees bob between petals, not saying a word. Margaret told me later, "I hadn't felt that peaceful in years." Then came the pneumonia. Edith's lungs, weakened by a lifetime of singing and the occasional sneaked cigarette, couldn't fight it off. For 3 days, Margaret rarely left her bedside. She'd read aloud from their favorite Agatha Christie novel, even though they both knew whodunit by heart. When Edith drifted off, Margaret would whisper stories of their adventures, the talent shows, the Jell-O heists, the time they'd convinced the kitchen staff to make lasagna at 10 a.m. just because they craved it. The night Edith passed, Margaret held her hand and hummed Moon River, their go-to tune for hard moments. Afterward, she told me, "I thought I'd collapse from the weight of it. But then I realized she left me too full of her to feel empty." Now, I know what you might be thinking. How do you move forward after losing someone who changed your world? Margaret asked herself the same thing. For weeks, she wandered the halls like a ghost. But then, she noticed something. The poker group still met. The garden they'd tended needed weeding. And there was Ruth, a new resident sitting alone at lunch, clutching a crossword no one helped her solve. Margaret hesitated. She missed Edith fiercely. But one morning, she slid into the chair across from Ruth and said, "Need a partner in crime? I've been told I'm decent at 7-letter words." Friends, that's the miracle of connection. It doesn't end. It multiplies. Margaret couldn't replace Edith, nor would she want to, but she could honor her by keeping their spark alive, by passing on the gift she'd been given. So what can we learn from these remarkable women? Let's break it down simply. First, vulnerability is strength. Margaret could have stayed closed off, guarding her quiet life. Edith could have hidden her fears behind jokes. But by risking honesty, they built something unshakable. Second, joy is a choice you make daily, not a feeling that happens to you. Those midnight feasts, the kazoo symphonies, they decided to create light, even in a place others saw as an end of the road. And third, legacy isn't about grand gestures. It's the imprint you leave on another person's heart. Edith's legacy lives in how Margaret now greets newcomers, in the way Ruth, that crossword lover, just started a poetry club, in the fact that Willowbrook feels less like a waiting room and more like a community. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, "But I'm not in a nursing home," or "I don't have an Edith," here's my challenge to you. Look for the Margarets in your world, the quiet ones, the ones who've convinced themselves their best days are behind them. Be the person who asks, "Tell me about that photo," or "What's your secret for perfect pie crust?" You might just reignite a spark, in them and in you. And if you're the one feeling like Margaret did, invisible, fading into the background, please hear this. The world needs your stories, your humor, your too crispy toast preferences. Don't let anyone, including yourself, write your final chapter too soon. Before we go, I want to leave you with Margaret's favorite Edithism. On tough days, Edith would grin and say, "Darling, we're not old, we're seasoned, and seasoning makes everything better." So here's to embracing our seasoning, friends, to finding our Ediths, becoming someone else's Margaret, and remembering that every day is a fresh page, no matter how many chapters came before. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your unexpected friendships in the comments. How have they shaped your life? Let's keep the conversation going. And if you found value here, consider sharing this video with someone who needs a reminder that connection is always possible. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for more stories to warm your heart and soul. From my home to yours, thank you for spending this time together. Now go out there and, well, as Edith would say, 'cause a little kind trouble